Welcome back to the live streaming of American Krishna, where we delve deep into the sacred text that I always quote on this channel, namely the Bhagavad Gita, spoken allegedly directly by Lord Krishna himself, who is self-declared in the text as being the supreme person, the supreme personality of Godhead, as A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada coined the term. Speaking of editions of the Bhagavad Gita, I recommend, if you haven't read it yet, to read the Bhagavad Gita as it is by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, because, well, not only is it the most widely read on planet Earth, but I believe it is fully in line with the conclusion of Krishna's own teachings. Here, though, during this live, we are chronologically going through the Bhagavad Gita study guide written by a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, namely Hridayananda Das Goswami, or Dr. Resnick. And I always say it, he has a Ph.D. in Sanskrit and Indian studies from Harvard University, which he got faster than anyone in the entire history of Harvard, of that department at Harvard. And his wonderful study guide is a great way to go deep into the actual verses of the Bhagavad Gita and really associate, intimately with Krishna. And what is better than associating directly with God himself, right? So when you read the Bhagavad Gita, when you hear these verses as I'm reciting, and when I hear them myself, both you and I get spiritual benefit. The text itself, Krishna himself declares that when one hears, his own words, one gets purified, one gets reconnected to Source or to God himself. One is watering the root of our own self-realization. So there's nothing like associating with the Bhagavad Gita. So let's go on with this theme of sacrifice. Part 4, Dr. Resnick is talking about sacrifice, one of the major themes in the Bhagavad Gita. And now the question of mythology comes up, like offering to the different gods and goddesses, the devas, as they're mentioned in Sanskrit. Is this just to be taken as mythology? So let's read on. Is Krishna's talk of gods a bit of ancient myth mixed into an otherwise enlightening treatise? Should we sanitize such talks of God with symbolic interpretation? Before doing so, let us consider who the gods really are in Bhagavad Gita. Otherwise, for a modern reader, the term gods may conjure images of cartoonish ancient pantheons or pagan challenges to monotheism. First, gods are not God. So, according to the Bhagavad Gita, even though the Bhagavad Gita is clearly a monotheistic text, which establishes the existence of a supreme person ultimately, it does not sanitize away, as Protestant Christianity has done to a great degree, a whole universe filled with life, filled with intelligent life, and filled with, why not, gods and goddesses who are not independent, who are all working under the jurisdiction and control ultimately of that one Supreme Lord. So we're still in a monotheistic paradigm, but who are invested by that Supreme Lord with powers of management of the universe. What's the big deal in believing that? So let's go back here. First, gods are not God. Okay, we made that clear. Second, they carry out rational duties. They manage a big corporation called the universe. Keep in mind that the modern West still uses divine language to name rich and powerful humans. So here's a little footnote. And here he says, thus with German Herr, or Italian Signore, or Portuguese Senhor, or Spanish señor, French monsieur, or even English sir, one politely addresses men with a word that either means or is derived from Lord. And in most of these cases, there is a precise feminine equivalent. So we have Sanskrit deva, or God, with a not capital, but lower cap, G, okay? So again, the cosmology of the Bhagavad Gita is monotheistic with a head honcho at the top, Krishna, the Supreme Person, but under him are different empowered living beings who have, bodies of gods and goddesses, like, Lord Brahma, Lord, Ganesh, Indra, Vidur, what's it called? What's his name? Anyway, there's different names in Sanskrit of the different gods who are in charge of the management of this big corporation called the universe. Third, these cosmic administrators are far superior to us. Hence, we cannot demand instant access to them any more than ordinary citizens can demand intimate meetings with the world's most powerful leaders. And in spite of that, though, you have a whole huge category of study called, the whole ufology, or the whole study on extraterrestrial contact. What in all that is mythology and just made up nonsense? What is actual truth is another topic. And, experts in ufology can argue that. But the principle, according to the Gita, is that just as we have, you can't just say, okay, I want to see Monsieur Macron, or I want to, meet Mr. Trump. Well, similarly, it's not that easy to have access to the administrators of the universe. But the idea is that they do exist. Let's continue. But even if one chooses to suspend contemporary incredulity, one might still object to yajna, right, or sacrifice, on the grounds that God seems to be doing business instead of just loving us. Yet Krishna enjoins offerings to gods only for unmindful souls who do not care about God but do try to enjoy his creation. So here we go. Krishna describes in a very broad sense, and in a very generous sense too, because it's like God is like, look, the best thing for you is just to, love me with devotion. But let me explain how most people in this material world, at least when they're pious, try to get ahead and try to do business with me and my representatives. It's not what pleases me the most, and ultimately it's not what's going to please them the most. But here's how it works. And that's what he does. He explains what we did last time, what the verses that we saw last time, how God creates the world, and creatures are injected in there, you and I, and then with the actual ability of performing sacrifice to the gods and goddesses, human beings perform sacrifices to the gods and goddesses. The gods and goddesses are happy, and they bestow material blessings like material prosperity down to earth, down to humans, who therefore are happy, and then they enjoy that, and then still they sacrifice some of that back up to the gods, and then in that famous verse 3:16, a cycle has thus been made to turn. All right, but it's still materialistic. It's pious, but it's materialistic. The real thing here is bhakti, or devotion, a selfless sacrifice of love, of devotion to God without wanting anything in return. Let's get to it. Indeed, no sooner does Krishna enjoin these offerings that he adds a caveat. Here we go. One who delights in self alone, satisfied in self alone, needs not offer to gods. So let's go here to 3:17 and 18. At 3:17, Krishna says, right after mentioning that a cycle has thus been made to turn, this famous verse, he says though, but a human being who can delight in self alone, self-content, satisfied in self alone, has no duty. That person has no interest in acting or not acting, nor in depending on any being. So what does that mean, to be satisfied in self alone? It means to be satisfied in one's relationship with God, in one's relationship with Krishna or with God. Self-content. When you're established in your relationship with Krishna or with God, you don't really technically have any material duty to perform. You're free. You're free. And therefore, that person has no interest in acting or not acting. In other words, doing good karma or bad karma. Why? Because you're acting on the transcendental platform. You're connected with Krishna, with God. And therefore, all your activities are transcendental, theoretically speaking. So let's go back to Dr. Resnick's or Hridayananda Maharaj's words here, and then we'll finish. Only those who are intent on enjoying this world must pay a luxury tax on mundane pleasures. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Those who find higher pleasure in soul and God and do not try to exploit his creation need not make such offerings. Yet Krishna requests that they do so anyway so as to set a good example for the unenlightened. So this is an interesting point. Technically speaking, when you're self-realized, or at least when you're connected to Krishna on a continual basis, you don't really, you're free of any type of duty in this world. But Krishna still says, though, to set a good example, you should still, do it. So he says here, he even cites his own example at 326, 20 to 26. So let's look at this cycle of verses from 320 to 326. Sorry for the background noise. At 3 to 326, Krishna says, Indeed, by action alone, kings like Janaka rose to perfection. Simply considering the world's welfare, you should act. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, simply considering the world's welfare, you should act. And he continues here, whatever famous verse, this is a super famous verse, whatever the greatest man does, common people do just the same, following the standards he sets. Partha, in the three worlds, there is nothing I must do, nothing that I have not achieved or must achieve, yet still I engage in action. So Krishna himself says, Krishna or God is obviously, by definition, the absolute independent. As a matter of fact, he's mentioned in the first verse of the first chapter of the famous Bhagavata Purana, or also known as the Srimad Bhagavatam, a much larger text that devotees of Krishna read parallel to the Bhagavad Gita. And in that first verse, which glorifies Krishna, there's a mention of him being Swaraja, fully independent. And yet here he says, even though in the three worlds there's nothing that I must do, nothing that I have not achieved or must achieve, yet still I engage in action. And you see in the life of Krishna, which is, far out, it's inconceivable. God on earth, the source of everything, the creator of heavens and everything, the supreme person comes inside the material world that he creates on planet Earth, and then enacts these, wonderful pastimes as described in the 10th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And he sometimes did amazing superhuman things that only God can do, like lifting the hill, the Govardhan hill, as we know, or as we believe, the hill that's still there in Vrindavan, India, expanding himself into 16,000 expansions of himself and marrying 16,000 wives and being independently present simultaneously in each one of those palaces. I mean, it's inconceivable stuff, right? But at the same time, he acted in a way that common people could emulate, or in a behavior that people could emulate. And here he says, truly Partha, he reveals his mind to Arjuna and to us. Truly Partha is another name for Arjuna, because his mother's name was, if I'm not mistaken, Kunti, and there's a connection there with the word Partha. Pritha is maybe another name for Kunti. Forgive me, I'm a little unclear here. But anyway, we know Arjuna is named Partha. So, like Partha Sarati is the name of Krishna, the one who's the chariot driver of Partha. So truly Partha, if ever I ceased to carefully engage in action, people would all follow my path. These worlds would fall to ruin if I did not perform action. I would cause confusion. I would harm these creatures. So let's finish and go back to Dr. Resnick's concluding words on this topic here. Indeed, when he came to this world, Krishna performed many standard duties to teach others. This is the real reason for yajna or sacrifice. Those who seek to possess this world need to rise above the bestiality of seizing what they want with no regard for its ultimate source and proprietor. By offering back to God's agents who rule the very world one seeks to enjoy, one awakens one's higher ethical nature. Thus, the materialist escapes the tiny prison of self-centeredness and connects to a vast, just, personal, cosmic community. So in other words, this whole notion of sacrifice and practice of sacrifice, even the materialistic one that's, offered to the gods and goddesses, is ultimately meant to raise people, maybe in one life or in several lives, to the level of ultimate pure devotion to Krishna. And it may take several lifetimes of performing, materialistic sacrifices to this or that deva or devata or god or goddess. But ultimately, though, as Krishna himself, demands in the Bhagavad Gita, at the very end of the Bhagavad Gita, and it's no accident that of all the verses of the Bhagavad Gita, the one that Srila Prabhupada quoted the most often in his ministry from 1966 to 1977, by far was 1866, where Krishna himself says, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam braja. Aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayishami ma shuchaha. Abandon, Prabhupada translates this famous verse of Krishna in the following words. I know it by heart because that's the one I memorized when I was young. Abandon all varieties of religion and surrender unto me. I shall deliver you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear. And Hridayananda Maharaj translates the text in a slightly more, perhaps, literal sense, because Prabhupada did take a lot of liberties in his translations, which was, a wonderful transcendental charm that he was fully entitled to do. But if you want to be technical, and it's always interesting to see exactly what the actual literal translation of the verse. So, one literal translation of 1866 is giving up all dharmas. Come to me alone for shelter. I shall free you from all evils. Do not worry. So you see the connection when Krishna at the end here, he says, giving up all dharmas, come to me alone for shelter. He's rejecting this idea of worshiping this god or that goddess for some material benefit. He says, forget all that. Forget all that. Giving up all dharmas, because it is a dharma. The word dharma is complex, but worship to Shiva is a particular type of dharma. Worship to Ganesh is a particular type of dharma. Kali worship is a particular type of dharma. Worship to Zeus or to the names of the ancient Greek gods, or to Chak, the rain god of the Mayas in Mesoamerica. Krishna at the end says, look, they exist, these gods and goddesses, but they're not supreme controllers. I'm the one who's controlling the whole thing. I'm the source of all the gods and goddesses, as he himself says, aham adir hi devanam. Giving up all dharmas, come to me alone for shelter. So ultimately, that's why we can very safely say that Bhagavad Gita truly is a monotheistic text, with Krishna, or the Supreme Lord, being that supreme person, the supreme personality of Godhead, as Srila Prabhupada would say. Thank you for hearing me out. I hope you got benefit as much as I did. And until we come together again and listen to Krishna's words, I wish you all the best. And Hare Krishna.